Hello, welcome everybody. This is a September webinar with Marsha Carr. Marsha, are you there?
I am, yes, thank you.
All right, so I'd like to welcome everybody and I would like to handle over the presentation to you if you're ready, or if you want to wait for a little bit more for more people to show up. All right, so I started the recording, and we can go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, David. Well, welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to see that we have those in attendance, and we will start the presentation very shortly. Just for a quick introduction, I am presently, as the cover slide shows, associate professor at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. However, I did begin in public education, so I have worked as a teacher. I've worked as a director of curriculum and instructional design, principal, and the last decade of my years was spent as a superintendent, which I enjoyed very much. But what we're going to talk about today is a topic that's very near and dear to me, and it's called self-mentoring. So we will kind of later on, when we get into a couple slides, I'm going to ask you to give me a number from 1 to 10. And instead of doing polling or anything like that, I'm just going to ask you in the section for chatting, if you will just type that number into me, and then I can see those numbers on my end. I will also be able to, as the slides are going, if you have a question, if you type that question, I may not stop immediately, but at some point I will address that question then and make sure that I've covered anything. If there is something you want me to cover during the slides and you don't feel that I'm doing it adequately, again, just drop me a line in the chat section and I'll be able to see that, and then I can compensate for that or at least address it. So at this point, let's go ahead and begin. So what I would like to do right now is I want to assess your knowledge. And normally when I'm not in a WebEx and I'm actually physically in the location, I will ask people to stand up. And what we're going to do today is we're going to think in terms of the numbers 1 through 10. And we're going to think of 0 having the least amount of knowledge and 10 having the most knowledge. And I'm going to ask you to think of the word mentoring. And I want you to type in the number that you feel represents your knowledge of mentoring. And if you would type that in now, please. Great. Somebody's typed in 2. We have a 2, and a 7. As the rest of you are typing that in, now we have a 4. So we're getting an interesting array. Now we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to do it with the word coaching. So I want you to think of the term coaching, and I want you to think of 0 to 10. And again, I want you to type in your knowledge level of 0 to 10 of what you think your knowledge is of the word coaching. Interesting. So the last one we're going to do is the word self-mentoring. So if you feel that you are very knowledgeable in the area of self-mentoring, type from 0 to 10, with 10 being the highest. And if you would type that number now in for me, please. Oh, I'm delighted. I've got 4, 3, someone has a 7, a 4. That's really exciting for me because so many times when I go out to meet with individuals, it comes up 0 or 1, and people will hypothesize what they think self-mentoring is. But what we're really going to talk about today is we're going to talk about self-mentoring, but to understand self-mentoring, we have to kind of back up and we have to talk about mentoring and coaching. So we're going to look at all 3 of these on several slides. We're going to look at the differences in what coaching and mentoring look like and where self-mentoring fits into those. So if we think of mentoring and coaching as 2 separate areas, and then if we start trying to figure out where self-mentoring fits, I think we'll see that self-mentoring kind of falls in that overlap. And there's overlap in coaching and mentoring, and I don't mean to imply there's not, but by the same token, the very distinctive area that encompasses both mentoring and coaching is really where we're going to see self-mentoring. In some of the workshops I do, I normally will say that when people want an elevator speech of what self-mentoring is, I will say that it's the love child of coaching and mentoring. If these 2 had a child, this is what their child would look like. So let's look at kind of an overview in terms to make sure that we're all on the same page when we start talking about coaching, mentoring, and self-mentoring. So if you look at the first line that's bold and red, when it comes to mentoring, we actually call the individuals that are involved in mentoring, we call that the mentor and the mentee. In coaching, we call it the coach and the coachee. And in self-mentoring, it's basically one person, so it's the self-mentor. So when we start thinking about controls, when you have a mentoring relationship, for the most part, the mentor controls that relationship. They set up the meetings, they decide what they're going to share, how they're going to share it, what kind of guidance they're going to give, nurturing, developing the trust. In coaching, the coachee controls that. The coachee decides if they're going to answer the question, if they're going to answer it honestly, if they're really going to put any effort into it, if they're going to set an expectation. And when you get to self-mentoring, again, there's one person, so the self-mentor controls everything. They're not necessarily working with other individuals. They are deciding what their expectation is and how they're going to get there. And if we think of the span of time that each of these would serve, mentoring is really thought of as a very long-term process. Most of the time, if you think of school districts, they assign a mentor to the beginning of that year, and sometimes that mentor stays with an individual for 3 years if they've got a 1 through 3 beginning teacher mentoring program, or a 5 years if it's 1 through 5, unless that individual moves. So it is basically long-term. But when you think of coaching, coaching is very short-term. It's very specified. There's usually a very, very focused goal, and when that goal is met, you're done. Now, you can set up another coaching session, and we call these sessions because that's what they are. They may be a 1-hour session where you go in and the coach is just asking you questions to help you come to terms with things and figure it out. In self-mentoring, it embodies both. It can be short-term, it can be long-term. I've had individuals that have gone through self-mentoring for 2 weeks and met their expectation. I have people that have taken a couple months. So it really does determine exactly what it is you're trying to do, what the expectation that you have. If we look at the communication process, in mentoring, it's basically 2-way. The mentor is communicating to the mentee is communicating back to the mentor, and it goes back and forth. When you think of coaching, it often is considered one way. The coach is just asking questions. The coach isn't really nurturing or giving examples. The coach is asking questions to get you to think about what it is you're trying to do, to get you to self-actualize. So it's pretty much a one-way process. When you come into self-mentoring is going to be viewed as a one-way process, and you're thinking probably because it's just one person, but it's more because you are the person dictating how you're going to communicate and who you're going to communicate with. So because you're controlling that, it's going to be one way, your way. You decide that. And if we think of then in the last part of this, if you can see on the chart, mentoring for the most part, we don't always think of it as goal-oriented. Now, this is not to say that you can't have goals in the mentoring process, but it's not really designed to be very specific, hardcore goals that you have to reach. It is designed to be more of a building a relationship with someone of trust and respect and responsibility, and that you're working with that individual. That's the true focus. Goals kind of fall in there, but they're not necessarily what's embedded into the process. Coaching is the opposite. Coaching is embedded goals. You're really not there to develop a long-term relationship with this person and become their friend. They're there with a specific goal in mind to help you, and you have a specific goal you're trying to reach. Self-mentoring is also very goal-oriented. So now you can kind of look at this chart, and it kind of gives you a breakdown. It's not necessarily that it is this exactly prescriptive, but it is the way that I kind of operate as far as how I organize this when I'm working and how I'm organizing this when I'm serving any of these roles. So this way we're kind of all on the same page. The formal definition of self-mentoring is this: is an individual of any age, profession, gender, race, or ability, you, willing to initiate and accept responsibility for your own self-development by devoting the time that's necessary to navigate within the culture of an environment in order to make the most of the opportunities to strengthen the competencies needed to enhance job performance and career progression. In all honesty, if I ever thought that I was going to have to read this definition hundreds and hundreds of times, I sincerely would have made a shorter definition for self-mentoring. I can honestly tell you, I myself have never even memorized this fully. I normally break it into sections to help anyone understand it. So if you think of self-mentoring, the first part of it, it is just you accepting responsibility for your own development. And the second part of that is that you devote time to navigate in that culture, in that environment, and that by devoting time to it, you're learning about the culture. And the reason you're doing this is the third part of it is you're going to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to become available or that you're going to see in order to make the most of the competence you already possess in order to do better in your job, in your career, your profession, whatever your goal is. So that's probably the best way to break that down and really understand self-mentoring. There are some misconceptions. If you think of self-mentoring, just for the fact that we have that word self in front of mentoring, it often, people will think that as a self-mentor, you're doing everything by yourself, that this is all about you. And it really isn't. A self-mentor can work in isolation, but for the most part, self-mentors identify individuals, a legion of colleagues, a team or a group that can support you, that can be there for you. And that group or that team or those individuals may change as needed. So in other words, I may have a couple of individuals right now that I have lunch with and bounce ideas off of that I might consider my self-mentoring team. But by the same token, depending on what I'm working on, then I may have a different group that I talk to. So if you go back to that idea of control, it really is you controlling. You're reaching out to the people that you think are going to support you and do the best as far as to help you with the goals you're trying to reach. Sometimes you have to ask questions. I can remember when I first arrived at the university, from being a superintendent, I thought it was going to be a natural transition into higher ed. I knew that everybody said that higher ed was very political, but after being a superintendent, I couldn't imagine it being any more political. So I was absolutely shocked when I found out that, oh my gosh, it is. It very much is. And I had to adjust to that. So I started finding people that were good in things that I had a deficit. And we'll talk a little bit more about 4 levels of self-mentoring, and I'll kind of walk you through my process, which I think will help you understand it a little bit better. So these are the 4 levels in self-mentoring. This one, the first one, is self-awareness, and then it goes to self-development, self-reflection, and self-monitoring. And so let's kind of talk about these stages. And if this slide moves forward, I'll just back it up because it may be set on automatic timer. Sometimes they work in WebEx and sometimes they don't. It hasn't, the slides have not thus far, but surely now when I don't want it to, it probably will. So if we think of the first one here, self-awareness, this was me arriving at the university. And this was me realizing that I did not have the skill set I needed to be successful. I had not written a lot of research papers. I didn't do research. I might survey students or survey principals, find out what was going on in my system. I used cultural analysis. I looked at data, but I wasn't using the type of data and writing the scientific papers that was required of me in higher ed. I also did not really fit in the pre-K through 12 public education arena. It was very much a team approach, and I worked very hard to help cultivate leaders and other individuals and work with them. And when I got into higher ed, nobody really wanted to work with you. Nobody really wanted to have a lot of conversation with you. First of all, they were busy, but second of all, they probably have a completely different agenda than you do. So their research agenda, it isn't going to do any good to sit and talk to you because you're not going to really help them in any way. So everybody's kind of siloed. Everybody works in isolation. And that was really hard for me. I was used to feeding off of people and working with a team, and all of a sudden I had nothing. I was by myself. So at that point, what I started doing was I isolated the skill set that I thought I had that would work in self-mentoring, that would work in the situation, the environment that I was in, and then identified the skills that I did not have. And I said, okay, here are the skill sets that I don't have, and I'm going to have to compensate some way or I'm going to fail. So I started finding, okay, who's the person who knows the most about qualitative research, who knows the most about quantitative research. And I started reaching out to these individuals in order to build that self-mentoring team, that team of individuals I could go to. So if I did write a paper, no matter how bad it was, I wasn't embarrassed to go to these people and say, can you look at this and tell me what I need to do? I've looked at a couple of examples and what am I missing? So I had someone to support me and to help me. Hey, David, I'm getting some feedback.
Yes, we're having some connectivity issues. I think we can hear you now, though. Can everybody hear? Type in if you're having any issues.
Okay, Kelly just said she can hear now.
Okay.
And
all right, let's try to continue. And if this happens again, we'll see what we can do from the back end.
Okay, it looks like I'm seeing 4 that have posted and said they can hear, so it looks like we're good to go. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't realize I'd lost you until I got all the feedback. So from the self-awareness stage, I'll do a little bit of a repeat. I identified the behaviors, the characteristics that I had, the skills that I had, and then I identified the skills I didn't have, and then I started seeking out people that had that particular skill set to help me. So now that I know where my deficit is, and I moved into the self-development stage, and this is where I basically said, okay, what is it that I want to do my first year? What's my expectation? I obviously want to survive this first year, but I want to get at least 1 publication out, and I want to do at least 1 presentation. If I do nothing else my first year, that's got to be my goal. So I set up my goal, and at that point I started making contact with individuals. I had a team of people who would read through my paper. I had some people who specialized in quantitative research that I could go to as resources. So now I'm starting to work toward meeting that goal. And I worked with these different individuals on writing the paper, getting it to the point that it was more solid, conducting the research, and collecting information back on how well I had done. So an example might be, and we're going to move up to the self-reflection stage, say that I completed one paper and I had the paper ready, but I sent it out to 4 friends or 4 people that I consider self-mentors and said, could you guys look over this and give me some feedback? And then they provided feedback, and they may say, oh, this is horrible, or Marsha, it's not bad, but your description of the research process is a little weak, so work on that. So all of a sudden now I had information and data to be able to use to perfect what I was trying to do. And then the last stage is self-monitoring. And self-monitoring is nothing more than me being able to say to myself, okay, do I now get it? Do I understand the skills that I need? Do I have that skill set and can I move forward? Or am I still lacking things that I need to work on? So that's what self-monitoring is. Now, even though it's a step-by-step process, probably in the thinking process, the way that our brains work, it's going to look more like this. You may start in self-awareness. You're going to move over to self-development, self-reflection, self-monitoring, and you may begin again. Or if you don't have enough data in the self-reflection stage, you may have to back up, reassess that goal, go back up to self-reflection. And so you can see that it's a process that goes around and around, or it can go round and round. There have been 5 studies conducted on self-mentoring. We're going to do just a quick walkthrough with each of these. Just because I was able to self-mentor my first year coming from into higher ed from public education didn't mean that anyone else could actually learn to self-mentor. So there was that concern that it was just an isolated event that I went through. So if we look at the studies, in year 1, I had 5 teachers that volunteered in a public school district that we shall call District A, and it was a qualitative study. And I went to a district and I just basically asked for volunteers. And interestingly, the district said, okay, we have 5 teachers and we're ready to put them on improvement plans. They're not doing very well and you're their last hope. And I was like, okay, seriously? Okay, fine, let's see what we can do. No pressure. So I worked with the 5 teachers and I introduced them to self-mentoring and started walking them through the process. 4 out of the 5 teachers made a complete turnabout. In other words, by the end of the year, they were able to provide their principal their self-mentoring plan and the work that they had done in order to demonstrate that they were able to control what was going on in their classroom and they knew how to do it. The 5th teacher, one of the 5 that did not, was the only person ever in the history of all the work I've done in self-mentoring that was unable to self-mentor. And the thing about self-mentoring is you have to actually want to self-mentor. It's not a magic wand that just kind of zaps you and says, okay, now you're fixed. You really have to have that desire. You have to be self-motivated. And in this particular case, this teacher was months away from retirement, and when I asked her to write an expectation down and share, I was like, I would have taken it written on toilet paper. I didn't care what she wrote it on. I just needed something. She just absolutely refused to do anything. And because she was so close to the end of the year, there really wasn't anything that anybody was going to do about it. So we had 4 of the 5 teachers in the first study that actually were successful. And by successful, I mean that what we started seeing with teachers that went through self-mentoring was that their confidence grew exponentially. And as their confidence grew, then their self-efficacy of who they were and what their self-worth did also increase. If you look at some of the work that Bandura has done, he advocates that if you can raise the self-efficacy of a classroom teacher, you can raise the self-efficacy of the students in that classroom. And self-efficacy is just nothing merely but your perception of your value, your perception of how well you can do something, your perception of your worth. And so you're increasing how a person feels about themselves as a leader in the classroom, as a leader outside of the classroom. So just because I had one study, I really wasn't sure that it really proved anything, because it was kind of like, well, maybe it just was, I had 4 exceptional people that were able to master it, and maybe it still wasn't viable among the rest of the population. That particular school district was so excited with the progress in year 1, they asked me to come back year 2. So it was the same public school district I went back into, and they gave me 3 different teachers. Again, these were struggling teachers, and I worked with them, and we had all 3 of them have the same results. They absolutely loved it. We saw progress. Some of the directors actually sit in on it and were able to observe and watch what was going on, and were really excited about it. So at the end of those 2 years, I now had school districts all over in North Carolina that were saying to me, well, can you come to our district and fix our teachers? And I was thinking, you know, I really don't want self-mentoring to just be something that fixes something that's broken, fixes a teacher. I mean, that was never the intent. I didn't think I was broken. I just thought I needed some way to organize things in order to be successful. And I saw it as the same for these individual teachers. I just felt they were beginning teachers that maybe didn't have the support or didn't have a program in place to help them. So at the end of that year, I left School District A and I said, you now have 4 plus 3, you have 7 trained individuals in your district, and you can now start teaching self-mentoring, helping each other within. So I moved to another school district that was not too far away. And in that district, they gave me 6 teachers. And I kind of had a limit of 5 because I was trying to figure out what I was doing, and I was the only person working in self-mentoring at the time. So I really wanted to kind of limit it, but they talked me into 6. And the neat part with this year, year 2, was I was working with these 6 teachers. Actually, the same year I was working with the 3 in School District A. But I started with these 6 teachers, and they weren't broken. They didn't need to be fixed. They weren't on an improvement plan. They were already 6 teachers that had just moved into the district. Some of them were new to the school, some were new to the profession. So it was a nice blend. And I opened up and we started working in self-mentoring, and we had the same identical results. So School District B asked me if I would come back the next year and repeat that particular process. They were so happy with the 6 teachers the first year I was with them. So in year 3, I was done with District A, I stayed with District B, and I picked up 5 different teachers, and again went through the same process and same identical results. Also in year 3, we have a nursing program at UNCW, and they contacted me, the director of nursing, and said, we have 3 of our doctoral faculty who are probably in need of something and would like to work with you in self-mentoring. They think it might be a nice tool for them. And I was kind of intimidated by the process because I'm thinking, nursing, oh my gosh, I can't even handle a needle, and I definitely don't even like shots. And the thought of working with nurses, it just seemed like I was comfortable working with teachers. I knew that inside and out. I knew education. I didn't know anything about the medical field. But by the same token, it was a perfect opportunity for me to see if self-mentoring could now cross over into a different career field, such as nursing. So in that particular, the last of these studies that I have listed here, I engaged with 3 nursing faculty at the university and worked with them. And again, we had the same identical results. And they were really funny. They were highly educated. And when they got to the end of the process, it was kind of humorous because the one said to me, she said, you know, I feel really stupid. She said, it's not like you've given me anything that I didn't know, but just for some reason I was never able to organize it in the way that it was presented to me in self-mentoring so that it was logical and it made sense to me. And she just absolutely was overwhelmed with the fact that the simplicity of self-mentoring, but yet the results, that it was such a result process, and was very appealing to her. I'm presently working with students. I just finished the 2-year study with students at an early college. And I had 5 very, very diverse students from a lot of different backgrounds and cultures, and they just went through self-mentoring. And we're just now finishing up the data. It's pretty much come out the same. I can't see any differences. The students, even the principal of the school reported that the students were more responsive, became more responsible. The teachers in their classes said they started raising their hands. They got more comfortable with themselves. So obviously we saw a heightened sense of their self-efficacy as well as their confidence. Now, one of the things that happened to me was during the process is that people kept asking me to come out and talk about self-mentoring. And it was actually kind of boring. I mean, I don't know how, for me it was just like, how do you make something that's 4 levels, these 4 steps, it's like judo, how do you make that interesting? How do you engage people? And it's even more difficult in the online environment, but one of the things that I learned to do in face-to-face meetings that has been very helpful is using a hula hoop. Now, I'm turning 60 here in a very short span of time, and I grew up with probably the only technology I had was a hula hoop. It was considered a great invention that came along a little before my era, but was definitely there when I was growing up. So I was extremely comfortable with a hula hoop. And I'm fascinated that they're now becoming very popular in kind of a workout series. And you can buy them all over the place. But somewhere I got the great idea that you could take a hula hoop and I could run someone through all 4 levels of self-mentoring, and by using a hula hoop, I could teach them the 4 levels. And you can, and it works the same every time I do it. I even had a girl one time in the session who was like a hula hoop champion. I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. And I thought, okay, fine, this is probably gonna ruin the whole presentation. And it still went the same way. It just absolutely went the same way. So even though we can't hula hoop, and you definitely don't want to see me hula hooping, I don't do it, only in private, but I always have a couple volunteers when I'm doing the training. So what I start out with is we have the people that volunteer, and there's always a couple extroverts in every crowd who love to come up. And some of you may be thinking that, ooh, I would love to do that. And then some of you are introverts like me that are going, oh my gosh, there's no way I'd do that. But you get the individuals up. Sometimes I have one, sometimes I have a couple. It really doesn't matter. It's whoever wants to volunteer, and I always have a couple different ones. I have one that lights up when it goes around. I have big loops, little loops. The little loops are harder, so if I've got someone who happens to be a hula hoop champion, I give them the little one to make it trickier. So the first thing we do in level 1 is everybody has their hula hoops, and I just ask them, what skills do you need to hula hoop? What skills are necessary for you to hula hoop? Now let's take that right back. And then what skills do you possess that you think will help you be successful? So if I were answering those questions and it says, what skills do you need? Well, you need balance. I mean, you definitely would have to have some sense of balance. And you'd have to have some confidence. I mean, you really do have to, I think to hula hoop, you've got to have confidence that you can pull this off. You have to be somewhat flexible because you've got to be able to move your hips a little bit. And you've got to be agile. You got to be able to get into some positions sometimes to keep the hula hoop going around that you might not necessarily do if you're walking down the street. And then if I think about the skills that I possess, I have no balance, so I don't have that one. I don't have a lot of agility, so that's out. And I really am not that flexible anymore. So that's kind of out. So if I think of myself, I'm really a horrible person to try to hula hoop. But by the same token, I recognize that these are my limits and these are my deficits. And I recognize that I do have determination. I'm one of these people that tries really hard. I do have confidence that I can succeed at anything I put my mind to. So if you start thinking about it then, start looking at what are the skills that you do possess, even if it looks like the odds are stacked against you. Then the second part of that is, okay, so what I ask people to do is, what's their expectation? So I usually do it in two parts. The first question is, how many times can you make it circle your waist, a complete circle around your waist, and how many seconds can you keep it up going around your waist? So it's two parts. They have to estimate how long they're going to let it, how many rings it's going to go around and how many seconds. And so they always predict high on the first one. They clearly, confidence, the people that get up are not lacking confidence because they'll say, oh, I can keep it up for like 2 minutes. I think the hula hoop champion said 5 minutes. She was real comfortable. She made it 30 seconds. I mean, she was a champion and she only made it 30 seconds. And so we do it once, and what happens is then we write that data down for them so they can see, and then they get a second time, they do another prediction, and they lower it. They always lower it, and sometimes they only lower it a little bit, sometimes they lower it a lot, depends on how much they started, and they run a second round, and then they do a third round, even if they meet the second round. Normally it takes 3 rounds for them to actually be successful. I've not seen anyone not happen like that when you put them in front of a crowd and you start collecting data. Now, the self-reflection part of that is, then after we've collected all this data, they got the 3 trials, and they can see how many times it went around their waist and how many seconds. We ask them to kind of reflect on that, and normally the whole group will kind of help them out. Everybody kind of talks about it. You know, what can you do with that data? And they get one last time, and they get to determine how many times it's going to go around and how many seconds. And we do one other thing in the self-reflection stage, and we watch a video. And we watch a video because the video gives them the skill set that they might be missing. So think of this as the team of people you might go out and actually become your self-mentoring team. If we can get this woman to play. David, I don't think she's going to play.
Yeah, is there a link to the video? Let me see.
So while you're looking at that, I will go ahead and talk to you guys a little bit about what you'll see in the video. Hopefully we can get the video up and running. But she actually gives you 4 very distinct skills that I had no clue that there was a skill set to hula hooping. I thought you just tossed it around and prayed and hoped it stayed up. But there's an actual skill set. And so once we've had them reflect on it, we watch the video where they can actually see the skill set. And then they make their prediction. And when we get to the self-monitoring stage, they always make it. Even the ones who couldn't self-mentor or who couldn't hula hoop at all can do it by the time they get to the last one. It's absolutely incredible, but I mean, I've done this same presentation now probably about 20, 25 times, and there's just a distinct pattern no matter who I pull from the audience. Did you find the link, David?
Yeah, it's not working on the original copy. Do you have another, is it on YouTube or something?
Yeah, it is from YouTube. It's www.hoopingharmony.com, if you can see that right on there. If you type that in, you should be able to pull it up.
All right, I'll try to pull it up.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Is that okay?
It's perfectly fine.
Okay. So when we get to the self-monitoring stage, as I was already telling you, this is where you're just kind of asking yourself now, have I embedded the hula hooping skill, or do I need to collect more data and continue working on this behavior? Now, in our particular case with the hula hooping, everybody had embedded the skill and they didn't need to collect any more data. They actually got it and it was working great. But if they did not, if they still were unsuccessful, then they could continue working on it. So you can kind of see now the correlation between learning to hula hoop and how you work through the self-mentoring process. There is a very distinct way that it kind of complements itself. I think David is working on the link for us when we'll load up the video in a little bit. While we're waiting for the video, I wanted to guys, David, are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm pulling up the video right now.
Okay, we'll wait for the video. I know you guys are just dying to learn about hula hooping. Thank you, David.
All right, can you see the screen?
I can see a black screen, yes.
Let's see if it starts on.
Today, I'm going to show you how easy.
Can you guys see the video?
I cannot. Maybe someone else can.
All right, let me try that again. Is it still not working? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I saw a flicker like it was going to, and then we're back to just a solid gray block.
So that's not showing up right now?
No, sorry.
All right. I'll continue.
No worries. Yeah, no worries. We'll go back to the presentation, and they can look that up themselves if they're really interested in the skill set of hula hooping. But again, it's just a point. And I think that within the presentation itself, when she talks about that there are two ways to stand to hold your feet. You can hold them side by side, or you can plant one in front of the other. And so what people learn is that if they're trying one way, there is a second way that they might be more successful. And she talks about that people have a tendency to gyrate their hips too much. And she said that it's actually a very subtle movement of your hips. And once you realize that it really isn't throwing a hip out of socket, that it's a very, very delicate, then that makes that a whole lot easier. She also suggests that if you just take the hula hoop and stand in your stance and just throw it really hard to get it to stay up, you want to be able to get that beginning toss to throw the hula hoop in such a way that it circles your waist completely. And if you can do that, then that's when the hip movement picks up. So she walks through these steps that makes it almost impossible for you not to be able to. And the whole analogy of that is that sometimes we do have to reach out. It was when I was trying to figure out how to do qualitative or quantitative research, I had to reach out to somebody who got it. Just reading it in the textbook wasn't going to cut it. I needed that extra layer. So sometimes we need that visual support to be able to do something. We're kind of closing up here, and so I did want to make sure you're aware that with self-mentoring, it's not something that I'm just advocating for, and it's something I'm very passionate about, but it has a history of being recognized as a 21st century innovation and something that is very impacting to a lot of people. The first award it received was in 2013, and then in 2014 it received the Cahill Award. In 2015 it picked up that same Pedagogical Initiative Award. In 2015 it got the HULA Award, and 2015 Applied Learning Research Cooperative Award. 2015 it got the UNCW Faculty Startup Award, and then in 2016 on the East Coast it received the Coastal Entrepreneur Award for Professional Service. So I wanted to share this with you. I read an article one time that said you should always give people information so that they understand that it does have credibility. It's not just one person advocating for it. So there is a website. I never go to the website. It's just there because everybody wants a website. And it does have information on it. Some of the individuals who went through self-mentoring, their testimonials are there and everything. There's also, you can email me, but you can also just email me at Carr M, the email right here at UNCW. And if you have any questions, and there's now a self-mentoring app in the Apple Store, which I'm so excited about. It was an entrepreneur program that some students at UNCW took on and decided they wanted to develop an app. And so we actually have an app out on the market, which is exciting. And you can follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of things about mentoring, coaching, and self-mentoring, as well as pre-K through 12. And I'm always interested in meeting new people. So at this time, I'm just going to kind of open it up for any questions you may have, anything that struck your fancy, anything you're interested in. So I have a question. It says, is self-mentoring not simply self-development overall? Don't you think that sorry, it's really small print on my end for some reason, that the expression self-mentoring is creating confusion with the usual meaning of mentoring, which is basically someone more experienced helping someone else with less experience. So is self-mentoring not simply self-development overall? So let's start with that. And I guess I want to say yes, because in the self-awareness stage, you are self-actualizing. That's a part of self-development. When you move into the self-development stage, you are still self-actualizing. When you are in the self-reflection stage, you would be still developing the self. And in self-monitoring, probably the least. But yes, so I think you could say that overall, that it is a process. But I also think you could say that mentoring is a self-development process overall. Coaching is a self-development process overall. So I think you could tie that in with anything. I think it would be hard to find something that's not self-development if you really think about it on the minute level. Don't you think that the expression self-mentoring is creating confusion with the usual meaning of mentoring, which is basically someone more experienced helping someone? I'd probably say no. I'm trying to think how I could see that in the light that it's written. But you have to remember, I've seen the term self-mentoring since 2012, and only thing that I could probably say is that there are times when I thought that it should be self-coaching instead of self-mentoring. But the reason it was called self-mentoring is because when I arrived at the university, I was given a mentor. And my mentor was a wonderful person, a sage who knew everything, and one of those highly decorated professors you see walking at graduations with 15 medallions around their neck, and a phenomenal person, just genius, but wasn't able to relate to me and had been in higher ed his entire life. And I spoke a very different language coming from public education and was under a different set of rules and laws, and everything was very different. So it was not a good year for me because he just wasn't able to help me and he didn't know what to do. So at the end of the year, there was a conference on mentoring, and they came to me and said, would I like to speak? And I thought, oh, for heaven's sakes, I had such a horrible experience in mentoring, and I really never had good mentoring experiences, that I just didn't feel that it would be fair to get up and say that mentoring hasn't worked for me. Since then, I found that there's a whole research thing on unsuccessful mentoring relationships. So the reason it became self-mentoring is I decided to go ahead and speak at that conference, and they asked me what I was going to speak on. And at that time, I thought, well, I kind of self-mentored myself. I didn't have the mentor. I was the mentee, and I also served in the role as the mentor. So I served in both roles. So I self-mentored myself. So that's how the term actually began. That's how it evolved. No one else has ever coined that phrase. I think Stephen Covey has walked around it a couple times, but has never really done anything with it. So from my perspective at that time, that was the closest thing to describe what I had gone through. I had literally self-mentored myself through my first year by reaching out and self-developing on my own. So I think it can be confusing only if someone assumes, and this happens to me a lot, if you assume that self-mentoring means that you are doing it completely in isolation, then I think it's confusing, because self-mentoring just means that the self controls the process, not that the self does everything in isolation. That's a really good question, though. Thank you for asking that. What is the name of the video? let me see, I think it was www.harmony. I have to go back and see if I can find it, see if it's listed on the, let's see if we can find that for you. Hooping Harmony. I'm going to type this in here for you, and you'll recognize the picture. .com. She actually has a lot. I mean, I think this person is like, I don't know, for some reason, when I'm hitting enter, it's not loading my response. But I will have David send that out to you in email if nothing else. But if you go, yeah, she has like, apparently she does this for a living, or she definitely looks like it on YouTube. And I have no idea who this woman is. I've never met her. I'm not advocating for her. She's not my best friend or anything like that, or a relative. I previewed about 20 more videos than I wanted to. And hers actually, I thought, was the most concise. It was very skill set, which is what I was looking for. So www.hoopingharmony.com. Any other questions, comments? Thank you for the person who just wrote that. Anything else, guys? Listen, it's just, today was just to introduce you to self-mentoring, let you think about it. Kind of like, it's like a good wine. Smell it, take a sip of it, swish it around a little bit, and see how well it goes down. And see if you think it's got potential. It definitely has served me well in my life and a lot of people that I've worked with. And it's a tool that might help you. And it's a tool that you may not even be interested in. But the purpose is to give you that exposure today. And I know that you all have a lot going on. And the fact that you took time to be with me today and to learn a little bit about self-mentoring, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate that. You have my email. Feel free to contact me at any time with any questions, even if it's not even about self-mentoring, if it's about mentoring and coaching. I absolutely would love to hear from you. David, I think I'll turn it back over to you. David, hello. David, are you there? So maybe this has ended and I'm the only person talking and you guys are all gone. If so, thanks for joining us. I had a great time and you guys have a great day. Take care. Bye.